Somewhere in the mountains and valleys of southwestern Iran, an American service member is alive. Or at least, that is what the United States military is hoping. And both Washington and Tehran are racing, with all the urgency and desperation that search implies, to find that person first. Welcome to Tomorrow Updates. I'm Julian Thorne. What began as a routine combat mission on Friday morning has, within 24 hours, transformed into one of the most tense, dangerous, and symbolically charged episodes of the entire Iran war. An American F-15E Strike Eagle was shot down over Iranian territory. One of its 2 crew members has been rescued. The other remains missing. And as of this morning, the government of the Islamic Republic, a nation that the United States has been bombing for over 5 weeks, is offering its citizens a cash reward to capture or locate that American service member. This is not an abstraction. This is not a diplomatic talking point. This is a flesh-and-blood American military professional, somewhere on the ground in hostile territory. While 2 governments with incompatible objectives are both searching the same landscape, let us lay out exactly what happened and then let us examine what it means. On Friday, a U.S. F-15E Strike Eagle went down over Iran. A U.S. official confirmed that Iran shot the aircraft down. 1 crew member has been rescued and is receiving medical attention in U.S. custody. The status of the 2nd crew member remains unknown, and the American military is actively searching for them. The situation then escalated further. A U.S. A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft, known as the Warthog, was mobilized to support the search and rescue mission. It was also struck by Iranian fire. The pilot managed to navigate the aircraft out of Iranian territory before ejecting over Kuwait, where the pilot was subsequently rescued. Additionally, 2 U.S. military Black Hawk helicopters involved in the search and rescue effort were struck by Iranian fire. The service members on board were unharmed. So in the space of a single day, 2 American aircraft shot down, a 3rd forced into emergency procedures, 2 rescue helicopters hit by hostile fire, and 1 American service member still unaccounted for. This is not a minor incident. This is a significant escalation. One that tests not only America's military capabilities in this theater, but the psychological and political resolve of the administration conducting this war. Now let us examine the details that make this moment particularly complex. The F-15E is a 2-seat aircraft. It carries a pilot and a weapons systems officer, commonly referred to as a WSO. The pilot was the crew member successfully rescued. The WSO, the 2nd person on board, is the individual whose fate is currently unknown. The wreckage of the aircraft fell in the Kogi-Luya and Boyar Ahmad province of southwestern Iran, according to initial reports. Iranian officials offered a reward for the downed pilot and called on locals to join in the search. State-affiliated television channels urged residents to hand over any enemy pilot to police, with promises of a reward for anyone who did so. Iran offered a reward of approximately $60,000 to anyone who locates and hands in the missing WSO. $60,000 in a rural province of a country whose economy has been battered by sanctions and now devastated further by war. That is not a symbolic offer. In those communities, that sum represents life-changing money. Tehran is not just deploying its Revolutionary Guard in a search operation. It is activating the civilian population as a network of incentivized informants. This raises the stakes of the rescue operation to a level that military planners rarely face in the modern era. American Special Operations Forces and rescue teams are not searching an empty landscape. They are operating in a populated area where ordinary citizens have been financially motivated to find the same person and deliver them to a government that would, at minimum, use a captured American service member as the most powerful bargaining chip in this war. A U.S. Special Forces veteran who specializes in rescuing people from conflict zones told CNN that any operation to rescue the missing crew member would be very dangerous and complex. He described it as not being as simple as flying a helicopter in, getting on the radio, and talking to the pilot. Getting aircraft into the area, he warned, was extremely dangerous, citing video that appeared to show Iranian police officers shooting at a pair of low-altitude helicopters over southwestern Iran. Let us now address the strategic dimension of this development, because the downing of an American combat aircraft raises questions that go far beyond the immediate search and rescue operation. The Trump administration, and specifically Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, declared in the early weeks of this war that the United States had achieved what they called uncontested airspace over Iran. That claim was a cornerstone of the administration's public narrative, that Iran's air defenses had been so thoroughly destroyed that American aircraft could operate freely, at will, over Iranian territory. According to recent U.S. intelligence assessments obtained by CNN, roughly half of Iran's missile launchers remain intact despite daily pounding by U.S. and Israeli strikes. Iran has claimed to have deployed new, modern air defense systems built by what it describes as its own domestic scientists and engineers. The downing of the F-15E directly contradicts the administration's narrative of complete air superiority, and that contradiction matters, not just militarily, but politically. When a government tells its citizens that the skies over the enemy are fully under American control, and then an advanced American fighter jet is shot down by that enemy's air defenses, the gap between the official narrative and reality becomes impossible to paper over. A retired U.S. Army colonel and senior fellow at a foreign policy think tank called the downing of the jet a significant event for the U.S. military. Iran's parliament speaker, meanwhile, posted on social media that the war's focus had shifted from regime change to actively hunting U.S. personnel, a pointed and deliberate message about how Tehran perceives the current momentum. This brings us to the question of how Washington responded, specifically how President Trump responded in the immediate aftermath. Trump told NBC News that the downing of the jet would not affect the prospect of talks with Tehran. When asked directly, he said, "No, not at all. No, it's war. We're in war." When asked whether the developments would affect negotiations with Iran, Trump declined to outline a response if the missing airman is harmed, saying only, "We hope that's not going to happen." Those 4 words, "We hope that's not going to happen," coming from a president who has spent 5 weeks making sweeping declarations about obliterating Iran, bombing it back to the Stone Age, and achieving total victory, are striking in their restraint. They suggest that the White House understands, at some level, that a captured American service member would fundamentally alter the political calculus of this war, in ways that even the most confident administration cannot fully control. Now, what is the deeper strategic context here? The last time a U.S. fighter jet was shot down in combat was an A-10 Thunderbolt II during the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. That was over 20 years ago. 23 years of uninterrupted American air dominance in combat operations. That is the streak that has now been broken. Whatever the tactical or strategic circumstances, the symbolic weight of that fact is immense. It tells adversaries watching around the world, in Beijing, in Moscow, in Pyongyang, that American air power, while still overwhelmingly superior, is not invulnerable, that the right combination of terrain, tactics, and technology can extract a cost. At least 365 American troops have been wounded since the Iran war began on February 28, according to the Pentagon, with the death toll standing at 13, including personnel killed in hostile incidents and 1 service member who later died of wounds sustained in Saudi Arabia. These are not numbers that the American public has been conditioned to expect from this conflict. The administration's messaging has focused on the destruction being inflicted on Iran, the military installations destroyed, the officials eliminated, the nuclear program degraded. The American side of the ledger has been largely kept from public view, but the missing WSO, the downed aircraft, the reward offered by a foreign government to its own citizens, these cannot be managed with a press release. Let us now examine what this means going forward, specifically the race to find the missing service member, and what different outcomes would mean for this war. If U.S. forces locate and rescue the missing WSO before Iran does, the administration will frame it as a demonstration of American capability and resolve, a successful combat rescue behind enemy lines. If Iran captures the missing service member first, the implications are far more serious. A living uniformed American military prisoner in Iranian hands becomes the single most powerful leverage point Tehran has possessed since the beginning of this conflict. It would complicate every aspect of the ceasefire negotiations currently being mediated by Pakistan. It would create domestic political pressure in the United States that Trump would be unable to ignore or deflect. And it would almost certainly trigger a significant escalation in American military operations, potentially including the kind of actions that the administration has thus far only threatened. This is the race that is happening right now, in real time, in the hills of southwestern Iran. And it may determine the trajectory of this war more than any missile strike, any diplomatic ultimatum, or any Truth Social post. The search for the missing American airman is the human face of a conflict that is also, simultaneously, approaching one of its most consequential deadlines. And the 2 stories, the pilot on the ground and the clock ticking on the Strait of Hormuz, are not separate. They are part of the same escalating pressure system that is now pushing toward a critical breaking point. On Saturday morning, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "Remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait? Time is running out, 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them." That message was posted while an American service member remained missing inside Iran, while rescue helicopters were being fired upon over Iranian territory. while Tehran was offering $60,000 to civilians to help capture the missing crew member. The juxtaposition is important. Trump is simultaneously conducting a search and rescue operation and issuing military ultimatums to the same country, doing the searching on the other side. These are not separate diplomatic tracks. They are the same war on the same day, with the same human beings caught in the middle. To understand what the April 6 deadline actually means, we need to go back to March 26. On that date, Trump announced on Truth Social that he was pausing the destruction of Iranian energy plants for 10 days, until Monday, April 6 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. He said this was at the request of the Iranian government and described ongoing talks as going very well. That deadline is now less than 48 hours away. And as of this morning, there is no publicly visible sign that Iran has agreed to any of the core American demands. Let us be analytically precise about what those demands actually are, because there has been enormous confusion in the public coverage of this conflict about what exactly the United States wants. The Trump administration's stated primary objective, the goal it has articulated most consistently, is the permanent elimination of Iran's nuclear weapons capability. Trump has said that goal has been achieved. The secondary objective, the one that is now the active flashpoint, is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz carries more than 20% of the world's crude oil and liquefied natural gas. More than 80% of the oil and gas that transits the strait heads to Asia. The closure of the strait has triggered what the head of the International Energy Agency has described as a major threat to the global economy. Worse, in his assessment, than the two oil shocks of the 1970s combined, and worse than the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on gas markets. Those are not numbers from a partisan source. That is the International Energy Agency, the body whose entire mandate is to monitor and stabilize global energy systems. When the IEA uses the phrase, worse than the 1970s oil shocks combined, it is describing a potential economic catastrophe of generational proportions. And that catastrophe is unfolding in real time, with every passing week that the strait remains closed. Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh are all major importers of liquefied natural gas from Qatar. Qatar announced it was slashing its export capacity by 17% because of Iranian attacks, and warned it may be forced to declare force majeure for up to 5 years on some long-term LNG contracts. 5 years. Contracts that energy-dependent nations across Asia have built their industrial planning and economic forecasts around, potentially void for 5 years because of a war that began on February 28. This is the economic pressure that is now converging on the April 6 deadline, and it is pressure that falls not just on Iran, but on the United States itself, whose consumers are already absorbing rising fuel prices, whose Federal Reserve is watching inflationary signals with mounting concern, and whose midterm elections are approaching on a calendar that is indifferent to the pace of military operations. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago's president told CBS News that before the start of the conflict, he was confident the Fed could cut its benchmark interest rate this year. That optimism has waned as the war continues to drive up oil and fuel prices. Now let us examine Trump's strategic posture with the analytical precision it deserves, because it contains genuine contradictions that serious viewers need to understand. On one hand, Trump has issued some of the most aggressive military ultimatums any American president has directed at a foreign government in the modern era. He has threatened to bomb Iran's power plants, destroy its energy infrastructure, and, in his own words, blast the country back to the Stone Age. He has set and extended multiple deadlines. He has warned of all hell raining down. On the other hand, on the same morning he posted that all hell warning, he also posted this. Trump said on social media, "With a little more time, we can easily open the Hormuz Strait, take the oil, and make a fortune." The phrase, "with a little more time," appearing in the same 24-hour window as a 48-hour ultimatum, reveals the internal tension in Washington's approach to this conflict. The ultimatums are real. The deadlines are real. But so is the recognition that the strait cannot be forced open through air power alone, that a ground operation would be extraordinarily costly, and that the economic damage of a prolonged war is landing not only on Iran, but on the United States and its allies. The April 6 deadline, therefore, is best understood not as a moment of guaranteed escalation, but as the next in a series of inflection points, in which Washington must decide how seriously its own threats should be taken by Iran, by allies, and by the American public. Iran's position, for its part, has been clear and consistent. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told Al Jazeera, "You cannot speak to the people of Iran in the language of threats and deadlines. We do not set any deadline for defending ourselves." That statement is not bluster. It is a description of Iran's actual strategic calculus. The Islamic Republic, having lost its supreme leader, seen its military degraded, and faced over 5 weeks of sustained bombardment, has concluded that its greatest remaining leverage is the Strait of Hormuz, and that leverage evaporates the moment it agrees to reopen the waterway without securing guarantees on its own terms. Iran has presented its own conditions for ending the war. Those conditions include safeguards against future attacks on Iran, the payment of war reparations, and a recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. No American administration, not this one, not anyone, can agree to Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. That demand, if taken at face value, is a non-starter. It would effectively legitimize Iran's right to close the waterway at will, a concession that would undermine the entire international legal framework governing freedom of navigation, and that China, Japan, South Korea, and virtually every major economy in the world would find intolerable. So what we have as the April 6 deadline approaches is a genuine impasse. Two parties whose stated positions are irreconcilable. A mediating framework, led by Pakistan, with Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia in supporting roles, that is described by its architects as right on track, and a missing American airman whose fate hangs over every calculation on both sides. Here is the expert perspective that the situation demands. Wars do not end because one side decides to end them. They end when both sides have reached a calculation, simultaneously or in sequence, that the costs of continuing exceed the costs of stopping. The question that the April 6 deadline forces into focus is whether that calculation has been reached. For Iran, the costs of continuing are severe. Its military has been significantly degraded. Its economy, already devastated before the war, is under crushing additional strain. Its civilian infrastructure has been damaged at a scale that will require years to rebuild. Its new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, installed just weeks ago, is governing a country in a state of unprecedented internal and external crisis simultaneously. For the United States, the costs of continuing are also real, though less immediately existential. The global economic disruption from the closed strait is generating political pressure that the administration cannot indefinitely absorb. The military losses, 13 dead, 365 wounded, aircraft shot down, are not catastrophic by historical standards of warfare, but they are accumulating in a media environment that amplifies every incident. The missing WSO is the wild card that no strategic framework can fully account for. If that service member is captured, the entire diplomatic geometry changes. If they are rescued, Trump will claim it as a victory. If the outcome is tragic, the political consequences in Washington will be profound. What is certain is this: the Strait of Hormuz will eventually reopen. The economics of the global energy market demand it. The question is not whether, but how, under what conditions, with what guarantees, at what cost, and with whose narrative of victory attached to the outcome. Every government involved in this conflict knows this. The negotiations being conducted through Pakistani intermediaries, the deadlines being set and extended, the ultimatums being issued and then walked back. All of it is part of a process in which both sides are trying to reach the inevitable end on terms they can live with politically. The tragedy is the gap between that inevitable end and the present moment. The weeks or months of destruction, displacement, and death that stand between where we are and where this must ultimately arrive. An American service member is somewhere in the mountains of southwestern Iran tonight. A 48-hour deadline expires at 8 p.m. on Monday. And the global economy is watching a 21-mile strait with the anxiety of a world that runs on oil and cannot afford the alternative. I'm Julian Thorne. This is Tomorrow Updates. We will be here when the next chapter unfolds.